Madam Prolocutor, General Synod, members, visitors, and friends. Thank you for this opportunity to speak, albeit briefly, about the realities of human trafficking and modern slavery in Canada today, and about the responses of the Anglican Church of Canada in actions intended to increase awareness within the Church, intended to respond to the needs of people vulnerable to being trafficked, and to those with lived experience of this egregious violation of human dignity and human rights, and in advocacy to eradicate human trafficking in Canada and globally. We will be three presenters, Taanis Ryan, Ryan Weston, and myself. The session will conclude, as has been mentioned, with a request to you, members of General Synod, to strengthen the Church's resolve to widely and wisely and passionately engage freedom. The General Synod began work in this important new area of ministry, in part in response to the call of the Anglican Communion, through the Anglican Consultative Council meeting in Jamaica in 2012, urging provinces of the Communion to learn about trafficking in our home countries, about resources already available and activities already being undertaken to eliminate trafficking, to share that information widely within our national church bodies, within our wider communities and civil territories, with the Communion, and to develop and disseminate liturgical resources for use in local parishes. What is human trafficking? What are we talking about here? By definition, it is the recruitment, transportation, harboring, and/or exercising control, direction, or influence over the movements of a person in order to exploit that person. Today, on this day, right now, Canada is a source, transfer, and destination country in the trafficking of girls, boys, women, men, transgendered persons, where the two main forms of trafficking are for sexual exploitation and enforced labor, modern slavery, in domestic services, agriculture, fishing, and construction. Indeed, the Anglican Church of Canada needed to become more aware and much more involved.
We discovered in watching our Anglican Foundation video that we have a bit of a height disparity, Andrea and I. In response to the call of the 2012 Anglican Consultative Council resolution that Andrea has already mentioned, the Global Relations and Public Witness Ministries of the Anglican Church of Canada began a close collaboration to mobilize across the Church to raise awareness of and take action on this egregious crime and human rights violation. Working with our colleagues from Anglican Video, the Anglican Church of Canada produced a 20-minute video in the spring of 2017 to help increase understanding of the issue of trafficking and modern slavery across our church and in our communities. This project features interviews and testimony from survivors, service providers, and Indigenous elders, and it is available on our website, and so I will commend it to your viewing. Subsequently, at their June 2017 meeting, the Council of General Synod passed a resolution endorsing the earlier resolution of the Anglican Consultative Council and committing us as a church to raise awareness of and develop resources and initiatives to combat these forms of exploitation in Canada and around the world.
In September 2017, as a result of the COG's affirmation, a nationally comprised reference group of wise and experienced people, Lutherans and Anglicans, Indigenous elders, members of the LGBTQ two-spirited community, ecumenical partners, met to discuss how to make a beginning, to identify priority realities within the Canadian context, non-negotiable values and best practices, to make recommendations to staff responsible for beginning to animate this new ministry. Heeding their advice, it has been a priority in our efforts thus far to raise awareness and begin Anglican responses to the trafficking of people in Canada for sexual exploitation and the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and boys and men, and the enslavement of foreign migrant workers.
One of the recommendations that came out of this discernment of this reference group was the creation of a series of regional events, one in each ecclesiastical province, to engage local leaders interested in learning more about the issues of human trafficking and modern slavery. With financial support from the General Synod and a grant from the Anglican Foundation of Canada, the first of these gatherings was held in Pickering, Ontario in April of 2018, followed by gatherings in St. John's, Newfoundland, Edmonton, Alberta, and the final event in Nanaimo, British Columbia, held this past April. These Engage Freedom gatherings brought together more than 60 Anglicans from nearly every diocese in the country to hear from survivors, government officials, service providers, and advocates, to pray for an end to these brutal crimes, and to strategize on local initiatives to lift these issues up in their home communities. There are a few folks who attended those gatherings in the room today, so they might identify themselves at some point and let you know. Participants from these gatherings have written articles for diocesan newspapers, organized their own community awareness-raising events, developed partnerships with local networks, and engaged in direct advocacy with elected representatives, to name just a few outcomes of these gatherings. And we continue to hear from participants about their ongoing efforts.
Our partners in this work have been many in Canada and globally, and this number will grow. In our efforts with others in the Anglican Communion, we are indebted to the leadership and the vision of the Anglican Alliance, the International Anglican Women's Network, the Anglican Family Network. We look forward to continued collaboration toward the development of a global communion strategy, which is in the works as we speak. We are looking forward to a word to the Lambeth Conference and the emergence of a communion migrant network. We are also indebted to the leadership of the International Salvation Army in this work and to the ecumenical global churches witnessing with migrants.
In Canada, we've worked closely with a number of key partners who have long been active in the work of preventing this kind of exploitation, including the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking, Kairos Canada, the Sexual Exploitation Working Group of the Canadian Council of Churches, and the recently launched Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline. There's some information on this hotline at the Ministries of General Synod table, and I encourage you to help yourself and take some with you. They are providing life-saving work in multiple languages, including Indigenous languages. So please help yourself in the display hall. The Anglican Church of Canada has signed on to letters to governments and corporations advocating for stronger supply chain regulation to ensure that slavery and child labor are not used in pursuit of higher profits. And we have encouraged participation in the recent Kairos Canada campaign to strengthen rights and protections for migrant caregivers in this country. This work, I hope you will see now, is truly the work of the whole church, and so we remain committed to ongoing collaboration and discussion with dioceses, parishes, and ecclesiastical provinces, as well as several ministries and committees of the General Synod, including Indigenous ministries, faith, worship, and ministry, and particularly the youth ministry efforts of our church, and many other areas. We are already together doing the work of combating trafficking when we work to create safe and supportive spaces for youth. when we build relationships with communities experiencing poverty or addiction, when we support programs for suicide prevention in Indigenous communities, when we ensure that our safeguarding and safe church practices are as effective as they can be, and when we continue to uphold the dignity of all God's children. We now must build on these important foundations as we deepen our engagement across our whole church. In the coming months, we will be joining with several other organizations and networks around the globe in developing resources for a Human Freedom Sunday, to lift up this issue in our liturgies and prayers, and to encourage action both individually and together. We plan to use this initiative this year to highlight the creation of the Human Trafficking Hotline in Canada and to spread the word about this life-saving service to as many Anglican parishes as we can. We also join in the commitment expressed by the Primate and the National Indigenous Anglican Archbishop on behalf of our church to working on partnerships with others, including our colleagues in Indigenous ministries, to act on the calls for justice contained in the recent report on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. This report highlights the particular ways in which Indigenous peoples, particularly Indigenous youth and women, are disproportionately impacted by human trafficking in this country, and calls for action from government and the private sector in combating this exploitation.
And in addition to these efforts with others in Canada, we are committed to strong ecumenical interfaith and civil society collaboration towards Canada's endorsement of the UN Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Their Families, toward endorsement of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, toward holding Canada accountable for compliance with new national supply chain legislation, and to bring the voices and needs of enforced migrants to Canada's compliance with the new UN Global Compact for safe, orderly, and regular migration. We plan this and more will be available for collaboration, networking, and action on the existing National Church Web Hub on human trafficking.
And now, when we have had our gatherings, we have always worked really hard to ensure that the perspective and experiences of survivors and people with lived experiences is included in those gatherings. And so today we are very honored to be joined by Ms. Taanis Ryan to speak with us. Taanis Ryan is from Treaty 8 Cree Nation in northern Alberta. She is a woman who walks beyond her past of being trafficked and sexually exploited. Now an advocate, speaker, educator, and leader, Taanis volunteers with CEASE, the Center to End All Sexual Exploitation in Edmonton, and educates men at the Sex Trade Offenders Program. She also regularly educates people in faith communities and was one of the speakers at the Engage Freedom Gathering held in Edmonton last year. As a leader with lived experience, Taanis has participated in national and international consultations. As a woman passionately committed to walking with others, she is part of a grassroots initiative called The Journey, a healing retreat offered to marginalized women several times a year. She also volunteers with several other organizations. Taanis is a survivor and a storyteller. We are honored to have her with us today to share some of her wisdom with us. It is a large room full of people, so please make her feel welcome. Thank you, Taanis.
Panzai. Good. Hi. Creator God is good. All the time. There's a lot of people here. But you know, I get to be his vessel today, and I get to go and walk through fear and share my truth because it's important. It needs to be heard. I may go back and forth a little bit as, again, there's a lot of you. Let me go back to give you some history. I come from quite a large family. I know, you're shocked. But biological family. I have 10 sisters and 3 brothers. I have, when I was 2.5 years old, me and my 3 other sisters were found in an abandoned house tied to chairs. Our kokum came and got us, and she then got us adopted off into different families. 2 of my older sisters went to a family in the States. My younger sister went to another family in the States. And I went to a woman who I'd call Mom in Calgary, Alberta, where I was raised. Part of the adoption agreement agreement was that I know my biological family. So we would take trips once a year to go back to there. But I remember that day. I remember that day. I was almost 3 years old, and I remember being put in a dress and being left on the front of this new house in a new city with my new sister and my new family while my mom went in and let everybody know that I had arrived. And I remember that dress she put me in, and I was not a dress girl. And there was a puddle, and that was the first thing I did, was I ran to that puddle and I rolled in it. Needless to say, she did not put me in a dress again. I would honor her later on with wearing one, though. My mom was Joan Ryan. She was a social advocate. She was a leader. She was intelligent and advisor. She swept through Indigenous communities all throughout Canada to help them and help our people, and she fought for our rights. I also have an adopted sister, and I always find this hilarious because my mom is an anthropology, head of anthropology. She was actually the first woman department head, and she's French-Irish, Ryan. I'm Cree, and my sister's Blackfoot. I always thought that was a bad experiment gone wrong. She might have known better, but here we are. And yeah, so so with my older sister and being raised in Calgary, and she was off fighting for the rights of my people. Me and my sister got lost in that shuffle because she was so busy and so engaged. And I also want to say that we find this in intergenerational trauma, any color, any people, right? There's all people that go through it. She wasn't shown love as a child. Her mom died giving birth to her. So she didn't have any mothering skills. And I always believe she did the best that she could with what, she had. And I did get some of those advocacy and social gifts from her, and bravery. Growing up in Calgary, Alberta was difficult to say the least. There was so much racism, and there was so much hatred. People will say words don't hurt. I will tell you, they do. I would often find myself going home from school, climbing under my bed and crying in a ball because of things people and kids would say to me. It started to bring this core belief that I wasn't lovable, I was unworthy, there's something wrong with me. And I knew what that was. It was the color of my skin. So I really started to hate being brown. I really hated being brown. And as I would start growing up and going to school, my mom put me in a higher education school, which meant I was getting in a lot of fights. People finally stopped leaving me alone when they realized, I was gonna fight. I was a tomboy. I was a lot. I will say that. I'm still a lot. And tomboy, inquisitive. I was that kid that would take apart the toaster to figure out how it worked and not be able to put it back together. And this would, continue. And my sister, who was 4 years older, was always a compliant one. She was always the good kid. Whereas I found that my nickname was Disaster. I know who does that, but, I would get in trouble. And all I can remember ever was seeking attention and seeking love, wanting that since I can remember. And I got attention when I did things bad. So I started doing things bad. As I got older, again, like I said, we'd go back to the reserve for visits. I cherished these times because it was the one time of the year that I would be spoiled, as a lot of aunties and uncles as well. And my mom, she was kind of really sheltered, which I find really amazing because she wrote literally a book, and I don't know why she never chose to educate us. But so anyways, we would go back, and I can remember I was 3. We went back the first time when I was 3. I didn't remember that. The next time I went back, I was 4. I was getting spoiled by my aunties and stuff, and then I had a family member take me down into the basement and sexually abused me. Now, he had told me it was love. See, I've already had a skewed vision of what love is and core belief. But I didn't think that something was wrong with that. So I went and told my sister, and she said, that's okay. That happens to me too. And so this was like the norm. It wouldn't stop till I was 7 years old. And I'd go back to the reserve. I remember I was 7 years old and go back to the reserve, and I had my kokum and my family and stuff that were trying to teach me and instill me values and character and don't lie, respect your elders, I'm too good, encourage others. And I remember going back, and I hadn't met my dad. I had met my Uncle Johnny and my mushroom, who I loved because he taught me how to do chicken nuts and stuff. And anyways, I was 7 years old, and they asked me who, they came over and they said, my sister said, do you know who your dad is? And I said, yeah, I don't know. And she said, yeah, Uncle Johnny's our dad. And I thought, no, that can't be right, because if Uncle Johnny's our dad, that would mean anybody and everybody I ever knew lied to me. So I remember going into the house, and it was loud, and I remember I said, is Uncle Johnny my dad? And the house went silent. And we talk about drugs and alcohol and addiction and stuff like that, right? This is where that began, was from the trauma, from the core beliefs. And that 7-year-old little girl, I always say I put her to sleep into hibernation, because everything I believed in was gone. And so I built these walls up, these steel walls, right? Just because if I wasn't going to let anybody in, because I wasn't going to let anybody hurt me again. And it just continued, and it morphed, and we went to Montreal for a year. My mom wrote a book, Wall of Words, Taanis Ryan, and it was there that I learned how to ski. But I lived across a ski hill. I found I was really good at skiing. We came back. My mom put me on the team. Me and my sisters and my cousins, and they were all 4 years older than me. And I became really good, and I felt for the first time that I had some kind of identity that was mine. And that continued, but what also was starting to continue was I was starting to lie. I was starting to not go to school. I was starting to self-harm and cut, punch walls, fight. I was angry, and I didn't have somebody to tell me that actually what you are is you're in pain, and here's how you deal with it. So that anger progressed and progressed, and it would continue and line me up in front of the judge. By the time I was 10 years old, I would continue to be in front of the judge until I was 43. I remember a time when I was in juvie hall, and they give you chores in there, and one of the chores they had given me was to do laundry. And I just happened to have everybody's clothes in the laundry, and I bleached them all, which didn't make me a favorite. I did, though, never get that job again, I will say that. But it did give me this idea. So when I went home on a TA that weekend, I made a bath full of bleach so that I could turn myself white, so that maybe someone would love me. so grateful that didn't work because I really love being who I am now. um, again, my sister was 4 years older than me, and she'd already started getting in, hanging out with the wrong crowd and everything. And again, my mom was always traveling or always somewhere. And we always had nannies or whoever come take care of us. And she started inviting me around. By the time I was 12, I had matured young. And again, we didn't have a sex education. My mom never talked to us about this, but I knew I was growing and things were changing. And again, I'm seeking attention. So I used to walk around my neighborhood, and it was on this day that I was walking in the neighborhood, this older man pulled over, and he said, "Hey, do you want to ride?" And I said, "Sure, I'll take a ride," because I was going down to the park to see my friends and my sister. I get in his vehicle, he handed me some beer. I thought, this is great. You know, I'm an adult now, I can do my own thing. And he continued to drive me out of town, where he coerced me and he groomed me. And then he sold me to his friends. And that happened for about a week until my cousin stepped in, and she saved me. But by now, this had already continued to grow into my core beliefs of that I'm not worth it, I'm not worthy, and I'm not lovable. But I am a commodity, you know, and I can make money off it. And if someone's gonna take that right away from me, then I'm gonna own it. And I just fell into that system. It wasn't long before I was doing drugs. It wasn't long before I was hanging out in bike gangs. It wasn't long until I was in the wrong situation at the wrong time, and I got thrown out of a 2-story window. And I collapsed 3 discs in my back. They told me I would never walk again. I would walk again 6 months later, but I would walk out of the hospital with a morphine and Demerol addiction. They gave me some pills, and I said, "You must have given me the wrong ones, they don't work." And I had a good friend show me how to make those pills work intravenously, which would start that habit. And it was just a self-destruction path. I was on a path of self-destruction, you know, and by this time I had left all my family and stuff because I was doing them a favor. They didn't want me around anyways, right? And I didn't want to hurt them, so I was gonna do them a favor and leave, and I did. And I ended up, you know, getting in situations, you know, that were harmful to me and harmful to other people. I ended up at this party and ended up getting gang raped. And ended up getting pregnant from that gang rape. And I finally went home. I thought maybe my mom will help me. And I went home and I told her. And she said, "It's your fault from the way you dress." That would be the last time I would see my mother. Until 4 months later, when she would take me to Hawaii to have an abortion because I was too far along in Canada. So Christmas, 13 years old, sitting in Hawaii, just had an abortion, and I gotta come sit out and pretend like everything's okay and everything's all right. Nobody knows, because that's the way that my mom used to live, right? So then I get home. As soon as I came home, I ran away, and I ran to the streets. And I started hanging out with the wrong people. I got adopted into a bike gang family, and they knew I was young, they knew I was vulnerable, they used that, and I was angry. And then the abused became the abuser, and that became me, and that became my lifestyle, and that would continue. And I would go back and forth from being on high track to low track to working in hotels to working for somebody. And finally, I was out on the I was ended up on a stroll, and my sisters were going missing. We would later find out that they would be lost to the Pigton farm. I hated seeing posters, memorial posters up, because there were so many of them. You'd think that'd be enough to stop you from going out there, but you don't. I kept going out. I ended up getting hit by a truck, gratefully. I know, nobody says that, but if I hadn't been hit by this truck, they wouldn't have known that there was an infection inside of me that had ate the cartilage off my whole left hip bone that I didn't know because I was still using it and I didn't feel anything. And it was spreading to my spine. So had I got hit by that truck, I would have been paralyzed. I was, again, hospitalized for 10 months, told I wouldn't walk again. I did. I did walk again. God is good, you know? And I'm not going to go on with the more war stories because I'm pretty sure you get the idea, but this is a kind of lifestyle. It wouldn't be weird to, in one day, to see 3 life and death situations happen, to be in that situation of life and death. The fact that I'm here, I'm a living miracle. You know, I'm a living freaking miracle. God, that he kept me going. There was something inside me that kept getting up. I've been to 15 treatment centers. I've been to Vancouver Treatment Center. God brings you full circle. I got to come back here a couple of years ago with Trisha Baptiste, and we got to put up that totem pole for truth and reconciliation. We took over Maine and Hastings. Where I used to be sketching out, now I was standing, you know. Finally, 2012, I finally had an apartment, I had a place, I had money, I had drugs, it was Christmas Day. I thought I finally made it, I'm gonna make old school come back. And then I realized I had nobody that I could share it with that wasn't gonna cap me, hurt me, or jack me. And so I ended up shooting up so badly, but by the time I finally called the ambulance and they took me to the hospital, the doctor told me they were probably gonna have to amputate my legs from the knees down. They told me that I probably wasn't gonna make it through the year because of my health. I also had a 7-year pen bit hanging over my head for my 4th trafficking charge. You wanna quit, right? No. By this time, after being 15 treatment centers and trying and getting up thousands of times, only to fall down again, I finally was done, and I was tired, but I knew the system, and I didn't want to go to the jail. I didn't want to go to jail. I didn't want to go to the pen, a bunch of women, and no drugs in my own mind. But literally, I had been living in my own jail for 35 years. And I ended up going to Bonnievale Treatment Center, and from there, it was a cultural-based thing. And then from there, I went to a 1-year faith-based program called the Hope Mission. And I went back to the judge, and he gave me a 2-year sentence to serve in the community. When I was on the stroll, there used to be this van that used to come away, this big white van that used to come around and pick me up, and they'd want to pray for me, and I'd be like, oh, don't pray for me. There used to be this lady, Christine, she'd always want to pray for me, and be like, don't pray for me. I got to get back out in the dark. I said, but tell me to be safe, and pray for me when I get off, and she did. And then I met a lady named Carrie, and she was the same thing. She would pray for me. And then it got to be when I was out there that van was a beacon of light for me. It was my only safe time when I was out there. It was the only time someone listened to me. It was the only time I felt that somebody cared about me. And I knew that because they were volunteers. So I signed up for a 1-year treatment program, Hope Mission. I started sleeping, started eating, showering, got some stability, got some accountability. They had this thing called Bible class from 9 to 10. I thought it was unfair punishment. I didn't know what it was. It seemed like everybody knew God except me. But they had prayers where you could pray afterwards, and you could pray for people or ask for things. So I was too embarrassed to do it in there, but I remember going outside on the grass and sitting there and saying, God, if you're all that powerful, take this obsession away from me. Boom, no burning bush, nothing. It's pretty much what I thought. Off I went. Sitting around, went out about 2 weeks later, and I was sitting there and I was thinking, Taanis, you didn't think of drugs or alcohol today. You didn't think of drugs or alcohol yesterday. When did that happen? And I thought I didn't know exactly when it happened, but I knew it happened, and I went, that a girl. Good girl. And then I hear this voice say, oh, no, you didn't. That was me. You asked me, and that was me. Now, people had been telling me, Taanis, look for signs. And I'm like thinking signs. What kind of, like literally a sign and everything, to see that God's there. And I had been a smoker, and I was thinking about quitting smoking. And I was on my bike and just got off from the gym, lit a smoke, you know, that's the thing to do. And rode my bike, got a block down, and my smoke went out. You know, not a big deal. Lit it again, second block, went out. And I thought, is this a sign? No. And I lit it again and went down to the block, and it went out again. And I literally stopped my bike. I happened to look up, and there's this billboard that says, "And you still don't get it?" I have not stopped seeing signs since that day. God is so creative. He loves me. We connect with humor and sarcasm. Oh yeah, he humbles me in some funny ways. But you know, and then my journey started. I started volunteering for that same ministry van that used to pick me up. The committees that I used to go to, Cease, Pave, Kindred House, all these places that I used to take from. I remember going to my first committee meeting as a peer member, and I was sitting at a table with every single person that had helped me and walked with me. I started working on a Salvation Army van. You know, I started working with the women's ministry, go out on the stroll. It started with 2 people that just decided to go out into their neighborhood and be in a relationship with the women and pray with them. That's how that started. Now there's 250 volunteers. It goes out 7 nights a week. They all come from big churches, but it's all under the umbrella of God and working. And you know what? If those people hadn't come out to me, I probably wouldn't have walked in your church. Probably wouldn't have walked in the church. And the church that I go to is the Salvation Army, and the pastor there was Danielle Strickland. And I remember standing at the doorsteps of that church, and there's like 25 steps away, there's a corner there where I used to call my office. And I said, it took me 35 years to go 25 feet. 35 years to go 25 feet. But I couldn't have done that without people that reached out to me, were his hands, came out of the church, met me where I was at, valued and loved me where I was at. I got involved in so many things. There's a thing that Danielle had started through Trisha Bapti here. It used to be the Women's Journey that he had talked about, where we take marginalized women out. We just pamper on them, love on them where they're at. We started one in Edmonton. There's so many creative ways that we can reach women and men. And you know, it's not just our women we're missing now, we're losing now, it's our young men. It's our men into the system, it's the men on, you know, into trafficking. And I don't know, God has just, I don't know why, but God has just shown me that someone has to be a voice. And I'm really, it's like this. If you see, here I am, here's God picking me up by the scruff of the neck and putting me back, right? Because my intuition is to run and fearful, right? But his love, I want to be obedient, and I want to give back what was so preciously given to me. I know there's been some heavy issues and stuff here this weekend, and I applaud you for even for discussing them. Because if we don't have those uncomfortable discussions and we don't have those conversations, nothing changes. I'm so grateful to be here. Oh, I forgot to mention, I got to mention this, my daughter and my grandchildren. I got to see the birth of my grandchildren, and my 10-year-old guy, he's almost as big as me, and he's just like, yeah, I just want to be his friend. He never has to see me. He never has to see Kokum drunk or thing. But, you know, not to say that there's been some tragedies in my life. There is intergenerational trauma, and I've lost 7 sisters. I just recently lost my brother 4 months ago, and then my last sister 2 months ago. Now, you think that brings pain and that destroys you and it breaks you? It does. It breaks your heart. But you know what? I actually had the time with them to meet them. And I know where they're going. I know they're all setting things up there for me. You know, I know they're in a good place. And, you know, I again, thank you for this. We're talking about change. Let's end the demand. You know, let's have uncomfortable conversations. Let's be creative. Let's be out there and be the hands and feet. Because without you, there wouldn't be me. Thank you. Hi, hi.